Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glen Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics, and we do begin this morning with Sara Jones. She's here to discuss the Adoptee Citizenship Act. Sara, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Glenn, for having me.
Let's first get into the problem. Define that for us, because I think a lot of people here in the state of Utah, and those even viewing this program this morning, may not be aware of it.
Thanks, Glenn. You know, I'm an international adoptee, so let's just say that up front. I was adopted to Utah when I was 3 years old. And even adoptees are really surprised to learn about this situation where many thousands of adoptees don't have citizenship. And when you said it, you know, opened up the segment today, that's exactly right. It separates families, and we should, in Utah, not really be supporting anything that is not family friendly. And what we do know is that years ago, in my generation, people were adopted into families from all different countries. In fact, in 2000, they changed the law in the Childhood Citizenship Act to give automatic citizenship to children who are adopted. The problem is that there was this arbitrary date put in place right then where it left out older adoptees. So older adoptees like myself, I actually fall in that age group, falls in that the older immigration rules, and it is so hard to get citizenship for those folks who didn't get the parenting or the guardianship to complete the immigration and the naturalization process.
Sara, I should mention you and I are longtime friends. I met you in middle school, and we went to high school together and the same college and whatnot, but you hit on a key point there. You were in a family situation where you were able to make sure to go through those steps and get citizenship. It's those that maybe don't have that type of family environment that are falling victim here, correct?
Absolutely, Glenn. And you know, the sad reality is, and no one wants to really think about this, but many adoptees don't end up in families with stable situations. Sometimes their parents die. Sometimes they end up in foster care. You know, sadly, some are emotionally, physically abused, and so they are not given that situation with parenting who either knew to complete the naturalization process or had the resources to do it. Many parents just innocently thought that when they adopted their children from other countries, their children would get automatic citizenship. I mean, that just makes so much sense, especially when you're legally adopted to a U.S. citizen parent. And come to find out many decades later, I mean, I lived my entire life believing I was a U.S. citizen, feeling like I was part of my family, being treated in all respects, even religiously sealed in the LDS temple, like many children are in Utah. And then come to find out decades later that you actually aren't a U.S. citizen. It's really shocking.
And when you do find that out decades later, a lot of problems come along with that. Talk about that.
Well, you know, I'm going to say I've never had to experience the immigration system myself. My parents, I was lucky enough to have my parents complete the naturalization process when I was 14. But if you have been in that situation of being an immigrant, it is a daunting process. And so many of these folks who end up in this situation are having to navigate the immigration system, usually alone, without resources. Unfortunately, their adoptive parents who chose to bring them to the United States are either no longer able to or no longer willing to support them in this process. And so they don't get the benefit of that support system. When they're faced in that extreme situation, like you said, of deportation, oftentimes they're discovering their lack of citizenship while they're going through the criminal justice system. And you know, if you kind of boil it down to its essence, none of us would be okay with that happening to our biological child. And so why would we be okay with that happening to children who were brought over to the United States with the promise of a permanent family, permanent citizenship?
And when you are faced in that situation, obviously it impacts getting a job, housing, all sorts of things. So a big problem there. And we've actually seen some international adoptees get taken from their families and have been deported.
That's right. And, you know, I've had a lot of people ask me, you know, Sara, why is this an economic issue? This is a family issue. It's a social issue. And I, you know, have had to think about this for a very long time because I was one of those that was really surprised that this was still happening as well. And I've been doing diversity and inclusion work for over 20 years. And when we stop to think about citizenship and what that means, it's really hit home at how much we take for granted, right? The ability to apply for a job, serve in the military, get a passport, just those things that are just that much easier for those who are just given citizenship. Those are the things we take for granted every day that these international adoptees who don't have citizenship just struggle and cannot take for granted.
Okay, there is a solution on the table. It's being considered in
Absolutely.
Washington, D.C. It is the Adoptee Act of 2021. Sarah, what would that do to clear up this situation?
Well, I'm really excited that our own Utah Congressman John Curtis is the lead sponsor of the Adoptee Citizenship Act. So I think Utah should be incredibly proud about that. It does a couple of important things. It's going to retroactively grant U.S. citizenship to all international adoptees. So all of those adoptees older, like myself, who got left out of that first round in 2000 would now be included. And then it also is inclusive of anyone who were under the impacts of this law since it was enacted. I mean, Glenn, that was over 20 years ago when they changed this, and oh gosh, a lot's happened in 20 years. And people have to live their lives, right? And so there's a lot that happened. And we want to make sure that for all of those adoptees who were in that situation and brought over to this country, some of them are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, if you can believe it, that are faced without citizenship, that they're given that opportunity and that it's inclusive of all international adoptees.
And what's the outlook for this? How's it looking?
I'm really excited to say it's incredibly bipartisan. I'm not going to take credit for the national work that's going on. A group that I volunteer with, Adoptees for Justice, is leading on the national strategy there. Currently, there's 63 House sponsors, incredibly bipartisan. Again, thank you, Congressman Curtis. Also, Congressman Owens is also a co-sponsor on the House side. The Senate, it actually started in the House, right? So as we know, that needs to build and it needs to go through committee and pass in the House. But the Senate's also building in support, and the Senate was introduced by Blunt as a very bipartisan effort on the Senate side as well.
Okay. Also, the Utah legislature sending a message through a concurrent resolution. Tell us about that.
That's what's so exciting about this. We as Utahns can show our support and show our encouragement to really cure this issue for adopted individuals. Senator Iwamoto has been incredibly supportive of this issue and doing everything in her power to make it happen. I'm really pleased that since the legislature opened just 9 days ago, there's already 9 Senate co-sponsors, which is really, really exciting. There's been a lot of work by a Utah group of leaders led by Scott Anderson and Shelley Johnson at Zions Bank, and just so many leaders and experts and legal experts that are supporting this effort at the Utah level.
And you mentioned the bipartisan nature at the national level. We're seeing that here in the state as well. Again, this is a statement or a message that the Utah legislature is looking to send in support of this act. But Senator Jake Andrigg, a Republican, also one of the key co-sponsors in the Senate.
Absolutely. And, you know, this is why it doesn't have to be a political issue. It's about families. The Utah way has always been very family friendly, child friendly, refugee friendly, right? We're very welcoming and inclusive here in Utah. Decades ago, we were welcoming to all of these international adoptees. And so now we have a chance to just remind people that we want to make sure that they're not going to be treated differently than biological children. It is a way that many Utah families form their families and you know, have children. And so we want to make sure that Utah is one of those leading in the nation to be able to say we care about this, we care about the people in America. We want America to be leading when it comes to adoption law. And
Sarah, you've already mentioned you are an international adoptee yourself. You're very passionate about this, even though you don't fall into that situation. You were able to go through the citizenship process, but still, you're very passionate about this. You reached out to me months ago saying, you got to get me on your show to talk about this during the session, and here we are. So why is it that you take such a role in making sure this happens?
You know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what would it be like to have to go back and live in the country where you came from, your country of origin. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? The rise in Asian violence, and I also reconnected with my birth family about 3 years ago. You know, Glenn, it's been interesting going through that experience because there's so many barriers to me connecting to my birth family. Language, culture, customs are different. You know, every way of life is so different. And I grew up as American. And I think when people say, well, you know, what's the big deal about somebody having to go live back in a different country without connections, without cultural connection, cultural knowledge, think about that disconnection they're going to have. You know, the sad reality is some adoptees who are sent back to their country end up dying by suicide. It is that big of a struggle for them to reconnect, and it's just not just. Right, so that if that happens, that should be their choice to go, but not be forced or kicked out of the country.
All right. Sara, thanks so much. We'll be watching to see how this resolution plays out, and we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Glenn.